You might think that the map of Europe is a settled story, a predictable mosaic of migrations where Romans, Germanic tribes, and Celts mixed until everyone looked more or less the same on a genetic chart. But if you travel to the rugged corners of the Western Pyrenees, you encounter a population that breaks the pattern entirely. While their neighbors across Spain and France share a genetic signature shaped by the massive migrations of the Bronze Age, the Basque people carry a biological inheritance that seems to have frozen in time. Despite being surrounded by Indo-European cultures for millennia, their DNA reveals something completely unexpected. They are a genetic island in a sea of change. They aren't just a different culture. They are the last standing shadow of a Europe that existed before the dawn of modern history. For decades, historians and linguists have been obsessed with the Basque problem. Their language, Euskara, is a linguistic orphan. It has no known relatives on Earth. It isn't Latin, it isn't Germanic, and it isn't Celtic. But language can be adopted through trade or conquest. DNA, however, is inherited. It is an unbroken chain of chemical information stretching back to the first people to walk these mountains. So what does the genetic record actually show? Are the Basques truly the original Europeans, survivors of the Ice Age who never left? Or is their distinctiveness a result of a much later, more mysterious isolation? To understand this, we need to peel back the layers of the human genome and go back thousands of years to the origins of the population itself. We are looking for a genetic fingerprint that survived the rise and fall of empires. Long before borders, long before kingdoms, and long before modern languages existed, the European continent was shaped by the ice. Around 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, most of Europe was an uninhabitable wasteland of permafrost. Human populations were forced into refugia, warmer pockets of land where survival was possible. One of the most critical of these was the Franco-Cantabrian region, encompassing northern Spain and southern France. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that the Basques were the direct, unchanged descendants of the Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, the people who painted the caves of Lascaux and Altamira. Genetic science today gives us a more nuanced view. While the Basques do hold a high degree of genetic continuity with the ancient inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula, they are not a time capsule of the Ice Age. Instead, they represent a specific snapshot of how the European gene pool looked after the first great revolutions of human history, but before the second. To find the moment they became different, we have to look at the arrival of the first farmers. Before we continue, I just want to take a second to say how much I truly appreciate you being here. It really means a lot to have your time and attention. If you're enjoying the videos so far, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps and lets me keep creating more content like this for you. Every population's DNA is a stratigraphic record of migration, and the Basque genome is no exception. It is composed of distinct ancestral layers, but it is the missing layers that make them famous. The first layer was the Western hunter-gatherers. When the ice retreated, these small groups expanded across Europe. Then, approximately 7,000 years ago, the second layer arrived, the Neolithic farmers from Anatolia. This migration significantly reshaped the gene pool of the entire continent. In the Basque country, these two groups mixed, creating a stable agricultural society. But then came the third layer, the one that changed everyone else. Roughly 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, nomadic pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, often associated with the Yamnaya culture, swept into Europe. They brought with them horses, wheeled vehicles, Indo-European languages, and a specific genetic marker. Across the rest of Spain and France, This steppe migration was so intense that it replaced nearly 40% of the total local ancestry and nearly 100% of the local male lineages, the U chromosome. But in the Basque region, the story took a different turn. While the steppe ancestry did arrive, it didn't overwhelm the population. The Basque integrated some of these newcomers, but then the door slammed shut. While the rest of Europe continued to mix with Romans, Visigoths, and Moors, the Basque gene pool entered a period of extraordinary stability. When geneticists plot the Basque population on a PCA map, a tool that visualizes genetic similarity, the results are striking. On a map of European genetic diversity, most Spanish and French populations cluster closely together. The Basques, however, drift away from the center. They form a genetic island. This isn't because they have alien DNA, it's because of their allele frequencies. They have the highest concentration of certain ancient markers in Western Europe. For example, the Basques have one of the highest frequencies of the Rh-negative blood type in the world, about 30 to 35%, compared to roughly 15% in other European groups. When we look at the Y chromosome, which tracks paternal descent, the vast majority of Basque men belong to the haplogroup R1b-P312. This is the same lineage found across Western Europe. This proves that they are not pre-Indo-European in their male line. They did mix with the Bronze Age migrants. However, because of a process called genetic drift in an isolated population, this specific marker became hyper-concentrated. They didn't stay different by being pure. They became different by staying isolated after a very specific point in time. But here is where the story gets surprising. If the Basques are so genetically distinct, you might assume they are the most ancient people in Iberia. But recent genomic studies have revealed a paradox. In terms of raw percentages, the Basques actually have less Mesolithic hunter-gatherer DNA than some populations in Scandinavia or the Baltic states. The mystery of the Basques isn't that they are unchanged from the Stone Age. The paradox is that they are a Neolithic early Bronze Age population that simply stopped changing. While their neighbors were becoming more Mediterranean through Roman influence, or more North African during the Islamic period in Spain, the Basques remained a genetic snapshot of what Iberia looked like 4,000 years ago. Their uniqueness isn't defined by what they have, but by what they lack, the genetic signatures of the last 2 millennia of European history. Not all Basques are genetically identical, and the geography of the Pyrenees has created its own internal gradients. Geneticists observe a cline, a gradual change as you move from the heart of the Basque country toward the edges. The most distinct genetic signatures are found in the more isolated mountainous inland provinces, like Gipuzkoa and parts of Nevada. Here, the lack of outside admixture is most pronounced. In contrast, coastal regions, which historically served as hubs for whaling and international trade, show slightly more commonality with neighboring Atlantic populations. This internal diversity reminds us that even isolated groups are not monoliths. Geography always dictates the flow of DNA. Why did the Basque gene pool remain so stable while the rest of the continent was in constant flux? The answer is a combination of geography and a powerful cultural barrier. The rugged terrain of the Pyrenees and the Basque Mountains acted as a natural fortress. Conquest is difficult in deep valleys and high peaks. When the Roman Empire expanded, they established a presence in the region, but they never fully Romanized the population in the way they did in southern Spain or Gaul. However, the most significant barrier was likely the language. Because Euskara is so radically different from the Latin-based languages that grew around it, it acted as a social filter. People tend to marry those they can speak to. Over centuries, this linguistic isolation reinforced the genetic isolation.
Before we continue, I just want to take a second to say how much I truly appreciate you being here. It really means a lot to have your time and attention. If you're enjoying the videos so far, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps and lets me keep creating more content like this for you. The Basques experienced long-term genetic drift, a phenomenon where a small, closed population develops its own unique genetic frequency simply because it isn't exchanging genes with its neighbors. So what are the Basques genetically? They are a living bridge to a lost Europe. If we summarize their genetic fingerprint, it consists of 4 elements. First, an ancient base of Western hunter-gatherer and Neolithic farmer ancestry that is higher in proportion than almost anywhere else in the West. Second, major influences from the Bronze Age steppe migrations, which provided their paternal lineages but failed to overwrite their culture. Third, a unique factor of extreme geographic and linguistic isolation that began roughly 3,000 years ago. And finally, a modern identity that is characterized by the absence of later Roman, Germanic, and Moorish genetic layers. They are not unmixed, but they are differently mixed. They represent a genetic pivot point, a population that participated in the great migrations that built Europe, but then stepped out of the stream of history to preserve a signature that has vanished everywhere else. When you walk through the green valleys of the Basque country today, you are not just seeing a picturesque landscape of the Atlantic coast. You are seeing thousands of years of human resilience written in DNA. The story of the Basque genome is a reminder that identity is not just about who we are today, but about the echoes of the ancestors who stayed behind when the rest of the world moved on. In a world that is increasingly interconnected and homogenized, the Basques stand as a testament to the power of place and the enduring legacy of the human spirit. The Basques are just one example of how geography can lock a genetic secret in place for thousands of years. But they aren't the only ones. Across the world, from the high Caucasus Mountains to the isolated islands of the Mediterranean, other populations carry their own unique genetic clocks. If a single mountain range could preserve a pre-Roman signature in the heart of modern Europe, what other secrets might still be hidden in the world's isolated corners? Which population should we decode next? Should we look at the isolated mountain tribes of the Himalayas, or perhaps the mysterious genetic history of the Sardinians? Let us know in the comments.